Hi, everyone. Welcome to another short chat, and I hope we have a good time talking about professional roles and relationships. Critical to success of teams and teamworks and interprofessional practice in general, and providing the best possible care to our patients is that we have a good understanding of our own role and that we're able to enact it. But at the same time, we have a good understanding of the role of the other members of the team. So not just knowing my own role, but knowing their roles and how our roles work together and how that is fundamentally about relationships is really key. So today I want to talk about three things in particular. People, makes sense, right? We're talking about roles and relationships. Professional roles that we find in IPP and how those play out, and relational communication. So critical that we're able to communicate in ways that are effective within the context of those professional relationships. So what are the really important things that we need to talk about in terms of people in general? We could spend months talking about people, a fascinating topic. But IPP really revolves around people. And it requires that we collaborate, that the people involved collaborate, and we do that effectively. And that requires people bringing together their efforts and their skills towards setting and meeting a variety of goals. And things like achieving better outcomes for patients or for communities or for populations requires us to have a really good understanding of ourselves and of those that we're working with. And recognizing that people are really diverse and that we have different personal identities, different professional identities, different personalities, different ways that we communicate and prefer to be in relationship with each other, different skills, and for sure, different motivations. So let's talk about personality here. Personality traits refer to an individual's psychological makeup, right? So you hear that word a lot in general. People talk about a person's personality traits. And so that's sort of the culmination of our attitudes, our values, our beliefs, our experiences, and our behavior. And then within interprofessional practice, personality traits have a really important role because team effectiveness is really in part determined by that balanced mix of personalities among a team. So teams work most effectively, not when we're all the same, but when there is that mix of personality traits, when we have different personality traits because we balance each other out. And so that balance can lead to dynamics that either really promote productivity and effective problem solving, but sometimes when that balance, when there's a lack of balance within the team, that can really have a negative outcome. So we can all start thinking together, we all start behaving in the same way, we all sort of feel that we have to act the same way. And there's a negative outcome because we don't have different then approaches to things, and that doesn't round out the possibilities for us. And so it's important to recognize that any individual can possess any number of personality traits or types, right? So we have many different kind of traits. And within a team, there can be a huge variety of backgrounds. And that's really important. It's really helpful. It really, again, rounds out the team or strengthens the team. Within your text, you'll see that we mentioned three types that are really important. And these are negative types, right, that are important to keep in mind. So Machiavellianism, oh my gosh, that's a long word. And it's really important, sort of just to place it historically, that it's based on character, a very famous character in literature. And so that refers to an individual's tendency or the belief that others are untrustworthy. And because of that, the person who has a Machiavellian trait wants to manipulate other people. So that real desire to manipulate other people. Self-esteem trait is a really important trait, and that denotes an appraisal that an individual makes of his or her own worth. So we determine our own worth when we look at our self-esteem trait. And finally, self-monitoring trait. This is an interesting one. In self-monitoring trait, that refers to our own individual tendency to pay attention to our cues, our own cues. So we sort of are our own police that tell us about our appropriateness. or different forms of behavior within our environment are acceptable or not acceptable, appropriate or not appropriate. So that self-monitoring trait is really important because it sort of is our feedback loop. It's our cue about how we're behaving within this context and the appropriateness of it or not. It's important to look at that self-identity in a broad way as well. So self-identity is really the way that an individual, you or I, perceive ourselves, describe ourselves, and identify ourselves. And it's important that when we think back to Erikson, I know you've all studied Erikson, and he, developmental psychologist, and he looked at life stages, describes the context, this concept, and really around that idea of movement of self-identity. So we move through different stages in developing our identity and our self-identity. And a main feature of that theory that Erikson focuses on is a development of a conscious self. And so that's that idea that we are consciously aware of ourself and ourself in the context of others. And that's a result of social interaction. So having interactions with other people enable us to not only see who they are and what they're doing, but we start to have a conscious awareness of our own self and how we behave, the roles that we take on, the behaviors that we are part of. And ultimately that moves towards what Erikson would call ego identity. So that conscious sense of self and self-identity. And it's really focuses on how we see ourselves as persons and how we see ourselves as persons in relation to others. And that concept of self-identity is not fixed, so we don't always have the same concept. It's movable, and it's responsive to all the experiences we have in life. So as we grow and we feel much more confident and competent in our workplace, for example, our identity of ourself, our self-identity within that setting, within our role as an RN or an RPN, grows and changes. And all of the positive interactions and experiences we have really enhance that, and all the negative experience. So if you feel bullied, if you feel not listened to, if you feel belittled, those really impact negatively our self-identity. So it's complex and it's dynamic, but the more a team is able to work with the members in positive ways to empower them and to help them to feel as positive as they can about themselves and the roles that they take on, and their really promotes the positive personality traits that you can have within the team, the more effective you're going to be, and also the more cohesive you're going to be, and the more pleasant it's going to be to work with members of that team. You're going to want to come to work because you're all working effectively together. You're working in ways that are positive and feel positive and encouraging. So let's just carry on a little bit more about people. We're still talking about people, and let's talk about professional identity for a second. So it's defined by a couple of elements. And professional identity is a set of beliefs and attitudes that we hold about our profession. So I value nursing. I think it's an incredibly rewarding profession. As a member of that profession, I have a very high sense of appreciation for myself and the work that I do. So it is defined, my professional identity is in part defined by my beliefs and values that I hold about my own profession. It's important to recognize that our self-identity is also deeply embedded with our own understanding of our role, and also our role within the context of the others who we work with. So if I see myself as contributing, a really important member that contributes to an interprofessional team of people who work together, then I develop a professional identity of one that is, again, empowered or positive. If I see myself as low man on the rung, not having much say, really feeling powerless, then my professional identity is really weakened, or my professional identity is impacted in a negative way by that sense that the boundaries between my role and another role are such that I am lesser. I'm not as important on the team. And then finally, professional identity really embodies or encapsulates ideas about how we should behave relationally and professionally with others as members of the team. So embedded in my professional identity is the idea that I'm equal, that I fully engage, that I have both the right and the responsibility to advocate for my patients, and that I have the right and responsibility to learn. so that when I engage with the team, I can ask questions that don't only help my patients, but help me to learn and grow. That's a really positive conception of how I engage with others based on a strong view of my professional identity. If instead I've been socialized to think that my profession is intended to respond to follow through on orders by another profession, then my conception is much smaller and I engage at a much smaller level. And it's important to recognize as well that this professional identity happens on several levels. So it happens not only on the macro level, so where you can all see it, but it happens on the micro level. So those are qualities of an individual and a particular kind of health professional in one little setting versus all professionals within a professional category, all RNs versus, and all MDs and all pharmacists engage within context of their professional identity, so broadly, and individuals within those professions on a micro level, a very small individual personal level, engage across these conceptions of values and beliefs about our profession, an understanding of our role and the boundaries, and how we expect ourselves to engage with others as that construct around professional identity. So important, professional identity occurring either on the micro level with individuals and on the macro level with whole professions. Let's talk for a second about values and beliefs. I think you know this, but I'm going to just restate it. A value is a feeling that you hold about something, a person, a thing, a situation, or an event. You make a judgment. And values can be enduring. So it's not just that I have this value today. I might have a thought today or an idea today, but a value is something that persists over time. So it's enduring, and it focuses on something that's desirable at a personal level or even at a societal level. So one of the values that we hold in nursing is the value around social justice or equity for all, that all people are equal. And these beliefs are really important. It's not just that it's nice to think about the things that we believe in, but let's get back to work and follow the rules. These beliefs structure the world that we make for ourselves, and they form the very basis for how we respond to situations in our environment. And our values and beliefs are something that we sort of carry around with us all the time. They change over time and with life experience and with exposure and contemplation. But it's important to recognize that having an awareness of what our values and beliefs are and behaving in a way consistent with them is essential for a sense of cohesion within a person. Our professional values are different than our personal values, although it's important to recognize that there should be some consistency, right? So if your professional values are completely in contradiction to your personal values, then you're going to feel some real dissonance, right? But our professional values relate to interprofessional practice because they can either support collaboration and teamwork and really enhance it, or they can obstruct it. Some professional values are much less focused on teamwork and collaboration and much more focused on those silos. Remember, we talked about that in the last lecture. And as we're professionalized through our education and through our practice, and continues to be reinforced over time in practice, those professional values are instilled and they become clearer and clearer. They become quite entrenched. So within nursing, we have certain values about what we believe about patients, what we believe about ourselves, what we believe about the world, what we believe about relationships. But other professions have those values as well. And important to recognize that within interprofessional practice, certain values are really important in creating environments where all members of the team are valued and all members of the team have the opportunity to fully participate. And so it's important that we just focus on that. And so here's an example that I think you might find interesting. Over time, we've really come to recognize that diversity as a really important concept within interprofessional practice is something that we cannot disregard because diversity makes us stronger. And often we've found ourselves in healthcare and in the health professions in places where we all tend to look and act like each other. And what that leads to is not only groupthink, but group in that kind of behavior that my kind of people behave like me, your kind of people can be whoever you want. It's not helpful. So diversity isn't just ethno-racial diversity. We often think of that as sort of racial diversity, or ethnic diversity is the catch-all. But it's not. Diversity happens on a huge range of dimensions. So it can be cultural, it can be demographic. So diversity can be around age. Do you work in a setting where it's all young people? Do you work in a setting where most people are between 40 and 50 or 40 and 55? Do you work in a setting where it's all women? So around those demographics, diversity is really important that we consider. And also cognitive factors is an important one. So within cognitive factors, we consider, do most people have the same educational background or educational preparation? Another important thing to recognize, and you might notice this in your teams, do most people have the same learning styles, or do we all have different learning styles? Do some people like to read the book? Do some people like to listen to the Zoom lectures or other things? So different learning styles. That diversity, it's important to recognize diversity, to really value diversity. Interprofessional practice absolutely values diversity. When we're focusing on patient-centered care, it's really critical that we take into account diversity. And it has the potential to create much more positive experiences for everyone when we work in environments that are highly diverse, and when we approach patients and each other in a way that values that. And so in interprofessional practice, diversity also recognizes that mix of professional backgrounds within an IPP team offers a really big range of opportunity to bring together knowledge, abilities, life experiences, and different perspectives than if we have a team made up of everybody who just looks and acts the same and has the same background and is representing the same profession. So roles are really strongly linked to the idea of identity, and they can be thought of as the positions that we take on and carry out. So I'm a mother, I'm a child, I'm a nurse, I'm a doctor. They help us to develop both our self-identities and our professional identity. So roles are structured in such a way that they impact our relationships with each other. They define and they impact the behavior of individuals in the context of a relationship, and that lets us know what we can expect from them in terms of behavior and communication. So when we consider the definition of a role, here we've got one that says it's a set of expected behaviors and responsibilities, and that is enacted or communicated through both what we say and also, importantly, what we do. And there's a variety of roles. Roles can be ascribed, right? So it's innate. So based on an innate characteristic of that person. So for example, I'm a child. Or I'm a mother. I've had a baby, and I'm raising that child, I'm a mother. Or I've adopted a child, I'm a mother. So it is based on an intrinsic characteristic. It can be achieved, and that can be achieved through various actions or accomplishments that we take on. So for example, for all of you, or almost all of you, you're an RPN, so you've achieved that role through your education and through passing your exam, your registration exam, and other things. Or it can be assigned, and that's where a role is granted to somebody. So for example, you could be a charge nurse, you could be a nurse manager, you could be the leader of your team in presenting at team meetings and other kinds of things. Critical to recognize, excuse me, that enacting our professional role effectively leads to overall team effectiveness. And the productivity of a team is hugely enhanced when we are able to fully enact our roles. And teams are more complex than just the roles. So if we put all those roles together and we add up, so let's say this role does that role does something else, that role yet does another thing. When teams work together, it's not just that we have those three components, that we exponentially combine the effectiveness, the outcome, and the impact of all of those various roles when people collaborate and work together. And it's so often when we work within a group, there's sort of a fluidness to those roles. So what kind of challenges do we experience when we're working within our different roles? And we're going to talk about a couple here. Role conflict. I think many of us may have experienced something like this. Is that when we experience the competing or conflicting expectations and demands? So so for example, let's say I'm working in a certain setting, and there is an expectation in my hiring that has made clear my role and how I should enact my role. And then when I'm arriving to work, the conditions are so different that there is not, there's like a disconnect between what I think I'm supposed to be doing and when I arrive for work, what I'm actually supposed to be doing. Sometimes also, there's role conflict between what I know is my professional role, what I've been educated towards, and what I believe is my role. And then when I'm hired, what the employer expects me to do in my job. That is really challenging and important to recognize that you always have to fall back on what you know your regulatory role is, as opposed to what an employer is asking you to do. In terms of role confusion, it's a real lack of understanding about your role. What is your role supposed to be? Or more importantly here, a failure to recognize the boundaries or the boundaries of the relationships that are inherent within your role. And so in role confusion, it's not that you experience, as in role conflict, that real dissonance between what I know I'm supposed to be doing or what I think I'm supposed to be doing and what I'm expected to do. It's that you don't really understand what your role is. And that can be quite dangerous for you, particularly in a regulatory environment, but also within the interprofessional team. Not only do you need to know your own role, you need to understand others' roles. And then finally, role distance. And role distance is that real cognitive, emotional, and mental sort of separation or detachment between who I am and how I see myself and what I think I am and how and other things, and the role that I am supposed to occupy. So I'm supposed to be an RN, and I believe the role of an RN is constructed in a certain way, but who I see myself as is so different that I feel disconnected from who that RN is supposed to be. And so that role distance is really challenging. And for a practitioner, it's important that we grow into that role. And so often people talk about feeling as though they're faking it. They can't possibly be an RN. It's just, and particularly within novice nurses, we hear this, that you feel like you're faking it and you don't really know what you're supposed to be doing. That role distance is something that a novice sometimes experiences in particular. Important that we also make note of an emerging concept, which is the role of the patient. So over time, the role of the patient has really changed. In the 1950s and 60s, you'd see a portrayal of patients as a very passive, not being told very little, and being sort of the objects of care. Over time, that has really changed. And now we see in recent history that patients are informed, they're much more active, aware of their rights, and greater capacity to evaluate the care they receive and the health services that may be available to them. And this really impacts interprofessional care in a very positive way, because we have patients who are much more empowered to be members of the team and to work with us in providing the best possible care, because they're able to engage with us in that way. Now, do you remember this? We talked about it a little bit before. It's the national framework, National Interprofessional Competency Framework. And one of the important areas here, you'll see on the left, if you were looking at this like a clock, you'll see it's about 10 o'clock, is that role clarification is really important within this framework. And what they comment on around role clarification is they say that it requires members to understand their own role and those of other professions, and that to use this knowledge to set and achieve appropriate goals. And that requires that we identify not only what knowledge and skills are held uniquely by each profession, but also what knowledge and skills do we all share. And then within that context, a team can determine what member is most appropriate to take on the responsibility for particular activity. So for example, if a patient needs to be ambulated to the bathroom, a large number of members of the healthcare team could do that. So the PSW could help a patient up to the bathroom potentially, depending on the context. An RPN could help a patient up to the bathroom. An RN could help a patient up to the bathroom. A physiotherapist could help the patient up to the bathroom, or a physiotherapist assistant could help the patient up to the bathroom. There's many members of the team who have different responsibilities or different roles, who would have intersecting responsibilities in this area. And it's important to recognize that we make decisions about who would do that based on the condition, the availability, and who in the moment is most able to contribute. So for example, if a patient needs to get up to the bathroom, to go to the bathroom, and that is just the priority, then the person most available, who is capable of supervising that patient, if that patient requires supervision, should do it. But let's say the patient has to get up to the bathroom, the physiotherapist is on the floor, and the physiotherapist wants to do an assessment of that patient. That might be the perfect opportunity for the physiotherapist to say, let me go in and help, because that'll give me an opportunity to see how this patient gets up and moves. So depending on our role and our task at hand, remember we come back to those dimensions, various members of the team have intersecting responsibilities around many of the same tasks that we have at hand. So within a team, there are many roles that we take on. So not just our role like an RN or an RPN, but there are many group or team member tasks, roles. And it's important that we sort of identify those and come to an understanding of them. And there's three basic classifications for roles within a team. There are task roles, and those are roles that help the team to accomplish what needs to happen. So for example, I could be the one who sets up meetings and sets up times and books a room for a meeting, other things. I'm the coordinator. Within your small teams, you may have somebody who organizes when are things due, when are we all posting, or other things like that. We also have contributor, or an initiator, somebody who brings up ideas for the team to work on. Or somebody who says, I'll go see if I can find some information about that, does the literature search on that. And throughout your careers, you're going to be finding information. There are also team maintenance roles. And those are roles that we take on, sometimes even not being aware of them, that focus on what do we need to do to maintain the team, to keep the team working. And so you may have the cheerleader, the encourager, someone who says, good work, guys. This is really, you're really bringing some good ideas to the table. You may find somebody who's the harmonizer, tries to bring all the different ideas together, what's common about different suggestions, and how can we come up with a plan. Or the person who's willing to compromise, and that can be really important in keeping the team moving forward towards one goal, as opposed to somebody getting just stuck in their own ideas. Within a team, we also have individual roles, and those are based on an individual's personal traits or our own orientation within that situation. So I might be a dominator. Have you ever been with somebody who always has to be talking, the one who always has to be the head of the conversation, always has to say something about something, dominating the situation and taking up too much airtime, airspace? Or a recognition seeker, somebody who always wants to be noted or seen, always has their hand up, always needs to be the center of attention. Or even a disruptor. A disruptor is somebody who tries to make trouble. Things are moving along, then they put a what's that? A wrench in the wheels or something like that to make things not function particularly effectively. So again, read your text and you'll see a few more of those individual roles talked about. So relationships in interprofessional practice are really critical. Successful collaborative teams and successful collaborative team members are able to maintain their own unique knowledge and skills, while at the same time they're open to collaboration and to recognizing that with collaboration, I have my own unique knowledge and skills, but someone else has also unique knowledge and skills. Sometimes we can come together in shared knowledge and skills, and sometimes I can recognize that that other person has knowledge and skills that are more important than me in this moment. And that's not always clear at the beginning, but you're open to recognizing that. It's really important that successful collaborative teams communicate effectively. And so that means we use sound relational communication, and that we apply knowledge and an understanding of group process. So 3 areas that we need to continue to develop that are really critical in our ability to be successful working within teams are self-development strategies. So our ability to develop emotional maturity and to handle challenges that occur within the context of relationships within teams. And our ability to understand the perspective of others, even if it's not what I am, how I see a situation or what I believe in a situation, understanding that another person has a different perspective that is just as valid as mine is really important. As we look at team development strategies, we want to focus on things like how to negotiate respectfully, how to manage conflict, really not only appropriately, but wisely, to bring some, not just knowledge of conflict management, but some wisdom around it. Sometimes that means a little bit of stepping back, looking at the big situation, and how do we work through this. And then communication development strategies. So how do we communicate effectively in emergencies? And how do we use things like electronic communication thoughtfully? And there's a lot of different approaches that try to help us with that. So one of the ones that I know many of you have learned about is, so for example, communicating with SCAR and other kinds of approaches that really try to streamline communication but make it most effective, particularly amongst members of our team. It's also important to recognize that within relationships and communication around within professions, so intra-professional communication and interprofessional communication, the culture of communication is really important. Within nursing, we communicate effectively, giving the context, giving the full situation and all of the possible sort of important information. And here's an example. You'll see there's just an example here, a YouTube clip. And that's when there was that, do you remember that there was that flight over the Hudson in New York where some birds ended up in the engine stopped working, and the plane actually had to land on the river, on the Hudson River. What's fascinating to listen to as you listen to the air traffic control tape of this is how clipped, how short and abbreviated that communication is. They communicate almost nothing. That's the culture of their communication. They don't talk a lot of words. They talk by check sheets. They communicate very abruptly. That is the nature of how air traffic controllers and pilots communicate. Nursing, we talk much more. We talk in full sentences. We provide context. We go back. We make sure that everybody has the same understanding. In the culture of their communication, it's quite different. So it's recognizing that as we develop strategies for effective communication across professions, we need to recognize what our own professional norms of communication are and what other professional norms of communication are in order to be able to breach that difference, to create a bridge between ourselves and others in that difference. One of the things that's really important to recognize when we're looking about relationships in interprofessional practice is that conflict is something we're going to talk about. And we'll talk about it a little bit more, but just to sort of put that as a placeholder, we're going to continue to talk about relationships in interprofessional practice, and in particular, how conflict may be part of that and how we can work through that. Hope you found this helpful, and I am looking forward to your first synthesis posting, which is going to be coming this week.